Hello again, and welcome back to one more devlog. This time it's number 42. So, after last week, I finally broke out of my writer's block cycle, and I decided, I'm gonna start this week. I'm gonna start physically dipping my paintbrush into the paint and start putting it on the blank canvas, and with the understanding that it's it's just a working design, and it's my very first level design, and it's very first anything about being um, this new skill of game design, level design, and the understanding it's not going to be perfect and it's not going to be great. It may be okay, but you have to do it a bunch in order to really master it and get advanced. So, but you have to start somewhere, and that's the thing. So, and just looking at this concept, you can't really test gameplay design. You have to build something, whether it's a white box, very basic. You have to have it in Unity running and playing, and your character running around to it to really get a feel for, is this basic level design prototype, is it valid in some sense, because this concept here, it serves a purpose. It goes in stages from quick to less quick, to even less quick. So this is pretty much what I have here is stage 2. Now, what I've done here, I could have gone and just pro builder white boxed everything, but I decided to go and try to bring it to close to final quality look as I can. Probably 80%. That's probably too much, but just, you know, not just white box, but like as close as I can to the final look and feel of what it's going to be like. That doesn't mean this is the final pass this is going to make in production, but it means that most of the heavy lifting of the actual level um, and work is going to be done up front. So that doesn't mean that I'm probably not going to radically change the room structure and what's in the room. What I might do later is, move things around, cut up these sectors, move them around, extend them, modify them if things don't work, and kind of, modify. So it's still kind of a prototype where you still can change things if you need to, if the design's just not working, but at the same time, you're actually play testing as close to look and feel as possible to the final product. Now, as I go, I kind of have, for each room, I kind of have these floating, instead of in my notes, buried in my notes that might get lost, I kind of, as I'm building this, it's just like, the interesting thing that I knew would happen is when I'm building this, I kind of come up with new, different ideas than there was in the original design, right? It's like, oh, what if I do this, or what if I do that? One of the ideas was this little robot guy, like, okay, you get let out of the cryopod, but maybe this robot comes in and pushes the panel here and lets you out, and then it's like, what is that little robot like? Why did he do that? Did he do it on his own, or somebody sent him? It kind of opens up avenues for inquisition, like questions, but anyways, I got started on Monday, and I was looking at the G-Spawn videos again, and it's this is a good tool. I was starting to work with G-Spawn, and this actually has a couple nice features what I wasn't using before on the prototype. It kind of saves you a step. I don't know how to use this whole tool completely and leverage all its functionality, but what I can do is I can I've learned how to make these kind of semi-modular prefab pieces in order to quickly construct, I want to say, the white box, gray box. So for the main function, foundation of the level, like the floor and the wall, I pretty much have these prefab pieces, and you can go to the extreme where you can design like you can design a system where you can literally paint in tiles and have tile rules, but I wanted a more loose free form because the tile rules kind of restrict you to like square corners and everything, and I kind of have it gets too complex when you kind of have like rounded rooms and such. So um, I use this to kind of block out big swaths instead of So if you go, I've created a few tiles for the floor, like a 1 by 1 and then a 5 by 5, and you can kind of it lets you kind of paint a big area of these tiles and it puts them all together for you. So it saves you a step, and then you can place individual ones. It has other nice features like you can do some mirroring things, and so I'm kind of learning how to, what this tool can do as I go, and that can actually help me create these levels faster. But you know, doing this is a little, it's a little time consuming, but I think it's a lot of fun and it's well worth it because um, you can, what I was doing here, from this design here, it's totally different from, what's on here. There's no details, there's no nothing. So when I was building this, it's kind of like, there's this free form creativity, which is like, oh, I have one cryopod. Maybe if I put it, like, make a whole room of cryopods, and maybe, and I was using my asset inventory here, and basically that allows you to kind of go through your asset library and kind of browse and kind of, it's like what you do have available and kind of import it and kind of place it like, oh, I like that there. Yeah, let's put a little table here, or maybe let's do. Originally, I had this wall down here to the floor, but I decided to use these from Asset Pack to kind of at ground level to kind of give more detail and texture and nicety to the overall room. So when you're actually so when you're actually looking down, you're not really seeing the high up walls very much. And we'll go ahead and start this up here. So I had to kind of, after I kind of made up this room, I kind of had to start. This is why the prototyping the initial level came in handy, because you have to have camera control. So I was using my prototype as a model, and I was able to employ this sort of camera control that's confined and restrained to the level, and then um, just like I did before, like this room is a sector, and then there's a portal here on the door, and the system knows when you. This is why all of that previous work was important, that I ironed it out and figured out how to do it, because now I have a system for transitioning between rooms. So I also implemented a feature that, apart from taking the shadows away, it also, when you transition through the portal, it'll know this other sector. It controls the lights for this sector, and this is nice because if you look at the game, you can't really see beyond the edges. You can kind of see the other room, but you don't want it kind of like bright lit up. And I kind of want to leave the door open for VR support. Um, but this is kind of the look I'm going for, like the Little Nightmares, where it's like your camera's outside of the box, but it's just a blackness, not too far away, but you can't really see out the edges. It's just a blackness. And then these windows, they gave like a 3D illusion that there's rooms beyond and stuff. And so I just took the time to give this first starting room, the extra details and touches that it needed. And one of the things I kind of saw, like, kind of understanding. So I have some artistic sense. One of the problems was this floor tile and these wall tiles. They look too uniform, too clean. You can kind of tell there's like a very uniform pattern. So that's not really natural to real life. There's a lot of chaos and a lot of dirt and a lot of imperfection in natural and even man-made things. There's a lot of different, if you look close enough. So what I had to do is kind of break up that uniformity. And what I discovered, I worked with decals before, but what you can do, you can project an image on a surface, and not just a albedo color image like for graffiti or a bullet hole, but what you can do is, I had to figure out how to project kind of this like this noise. I had this dirt noise, like a black and white, and I kind of had to update a shader to kind of not only add just a slight bit of, offset color, and you can kind of see, I can actually show you what it looks like without the decals on here. So if we go to the decals and we turn them off, you can see the difference here. See how it's all clean, uniform, and that can work. Most people won't notice anything like that, but the finer details would just be like, this, where it has a little bit of normal mapping texture too, where it kind of breaks up the uniformity. Each tile is not perfect, and maybe there's like a dirt smudge here. And the same thing for the walls. If you look at the walls, see this area here? If you take away the decals, see how they're all kind of the same, and they're all smooth and even. They have their own texture to them, but they're in between the same ones. You can kind of tell that they're the same prefab, altered slightly. Now looking at this, I kind of want to add some pillars here to hide the seams. I think that would actually, so things occur like that to me just by playing around with it, and kind of anything that kind of think I can improve on, I can kind of touch up. The same thing with these corners. Like here, there's this like rough edge, and I actually added a pillar to the edge of it, and it kind of, in the game, you can't really see. It kind of helps it out a little bit. You don't just see this hard edge, and things like this with the black, you're not going to really see these things here. So fine tuning and polishing to the final, what you actually see is what it's all about. And this is kind of what I'm going for. It's, and prototyping this game, I'm kind of thinking of like the actual gameplay design now. It's like, okay, it's dark and there's shadows. Maybe I can employ that in some sort of stealth feature and employ some sort of footsteps sound or something like that, Things that occur to me as I go that I don't really think about when you're not in the actual. So you have to have the game level in order to actually continue your prototyping for additional features. So that was so I was learning G-Spawn, or using G-Spawn, and by the time I got to the second room, so when we transition, now we have the V camera. I had to set up the V camera transitions again, and it will. I also had to set up a new door, basically the same as I did before with the animations. That was kind of, I've done it before. No sound, but it detects your character. I had to fix up the character collider detectors one more time, and I think this time I set up the colliders right, and I think I got the final grasp of how to actually set up a collider pair trigger properly. If you look at the actual, um, you know, which one should be a trigger, and and depending on who has the script that's listening, you know, which one should have the layer and the right tag. Um, Another thing I did, I finally I finally bit the bullet on tags and layers, right? I cleaned all this up on Tuesday, or I think it was Wednesday. I went on a real cleanup mission. There was a lot of these user layer tags that Invector imported that I was always kind of afraid to remove at the time, and I pretty much went and removed all of these and um, put these layers kind of in a position that I wanted, because these are the layers that I've built myself and that I know that I'm using, that they're familiar to me. It's like these are the ones I want to keep. Same thing with tags. It added a bunch of tags. I have no idea. So I cleared out all the ones except the ones that I was actually using. Same thing with rendering layers. But I never wanted to do this before because one of the flaws of Unity's system, everything about Unity is pretty great. Like it has all these, you know, file reference links. If you change a name or you change a location, the system will update the links automatically, the references. But not so with layers. Layers are the one thing that it's like a hard-coded array, and maybe they use that for efficiency purposes. I don't know. But at the end of the day, like, these are very hard to change, because what happens if you change a layer around the position or the name, all the dependencies that depend on that layer position are broken now. So you pretty much have to assume everything you've tested before is broken. And good luck trying to remember all the little, unless you know your systems very well. That's the only reason I've done it, because I know my systems well enough that I can change these, and if something does break, I know probably where and how to fix it. I'm that comfortable with Unity right now. And of course, that's what happened. I fixed most of the things that I knew about, but just um, regular testing, things like you go into here and oh, now the stop move layer is all messed up, you know, because it's set at different array positions, you know. So that's just something I don't plan on having to change around. Um, I don't plan on having to change around the render layers again after this point, because it's, you know, you really break stuff. But since I'm actually moving into a more production phase of the project, I think it's a good time now to really, you know, rip the band-aid off, break everything, assume everything's broken again, throw out all your old tests, and start, you know, start with a clean foundation instead of having this clutter and more of a complex system built upon it. Well, you'll have to do it eventually. So um, I finally got to understand and to actually very simplify my collision matrix. So all this is under control. So I had to sort out a few issues, but testing in this context of, you know, basic movement and all the basic functionality, I'll have to fix anything that pops up, but we're pretty much starting on a new, you know, we have to assume that uh, we get all the systems correct, and we're testing from a solid, you know, from a new starting point here. So that's what has to do. And at the same time, another thing, I was working with these scene managers and sector managers, and it's still a work in progress, but I had a lot of just when I was prototyping a lot of features that I didn't take the time to clean up, remove, or organize, and actually optimize this interface to where I come back to it a month later and be like, what the hell is this? include exceptions array used for? You know, it's kind of like a mystery. So as I go and use these controllers, just like everything else, like the initial game controller, it's all clean and clear and organized. But these sector controllers in this scene manager, they're starting to grow to large classes. So I really have to go into the code and kind of optimize the actual and organize the properties classes into their own sections, just so just so I can cut out all the prototype stuff I'm not using anymore, and to really identify, where the functionality is that I'm actually using that's useful at a glance, and so it's organized. And you're not kind of searching through this class and be like, what does this do? I don't know what this does anymore. So taking the time to do that, 'cause now that these classes are becoming more foundational and used over time, I can really identify, you know, what these classes are now. And I introduced this new thing of so my whole architecture structure, I have, each sector has a sector controller that reports to the scene controller or the scene manager. And that controls all the different sectors of the scene. And within a level, there are multiple scenes. So there'll be multiple scene managers as you load one scene from the other. And that's where the level manager comes in. Right now, I haven't really been working on the level-to-level context, but once I do, I think I want the manager to control that sort of. Right now, I kind of have it. I have the game manager kind of acting as the pseudo level manager, but the game manager is more for the overall. The game manager should be it should be managing multiple level managers, right? And it should coordinate the overall game. And yeah, so this is kind of the hierarchy. And then, but anyways, getting back to this, as I build the rooms, as you saw in the demo on Tuesday, I was making this cryopod. I had to, I didn't have the VFX for it, so I had to go, let's see if I can actually open it here. Where is it? Scene manager. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, open the cryopod. So basically, I had to come up with the animator, just like I did with the door, program the animation, and then come up with this this VFX. Since I didn't have one out of the box in all my assets, I had to come up with this on my own. And I think I did a pretty good job with the help of AI. I used a little smoke texture, and was able to make it look pretty convincing, especially at a distance. It looks like there's an initial burst of cold cryo whatever mist, and then it kind of goes on for a while. So I had to do a little controller, and also control, as you saw in the demo, it actually a little bit of a custom animation where it's just the adapted death animation, but it's kind of cut in half, where it's not, there's no initial there is no initial shot animation. It's just the falling forward. I kind of had to customize that to look right, but basically it looks pretty cool. It falls out of the cryotube and then executes the revive animation and gets back up, and you're ready to go. So that works for the time being. Took a little bit doing. So that was Tuesday, and then on Wednesday I was doing the VCam controllers, transitioning from one room to the other, just like before. I had this crazy issue going on where I was building this level, and this little section out here was not rendering, and I had to really dig in and figure out what the heck's going on here. So it was like this little hole where like the tiles were not rendering, and anything in that little like void, like even moving my character to that, I had to remove the wall and move my character, and my character would stop rendering. It would just disappear, and I was like, what the heck's going on here? So basically what happened, in order to do a shortcut, I actually cloned this scene from my original prototype down here, and that kind of brings over the data. It saves you a step, and because all the little customizations, like brings over the global volume settings that you had before, and a lot of other things like lighting and this and that. So, but what it also brought over was the previous occlusion culling bake and those configurations. So it was working off the occlusion culling data of the prototype level. So there's nothing there, but it was culling this thing as if something was there. So turning off the occlusion culling fixed the problem. I'll have to bake the occlusion culling data specifically for this level in the future, but it was kind of a weird issue. So yeah, shortcuts will save you a step, but they'll also throw you curveballs. If something goes wrong, you'll be like, what the heck is going on here? So it just took a little bit to track on. So on Thursday, I fixed up the VCam transitions and the actual virtual camera follow, and I was working on this Thursday was the day I cleaned up all my layers and tags and really went on a kind of a organizational spree. And refactoring the layers and tags, I had to kind of fix a bunch of issues, but I think in the end it's going to be really worth it to actually have that finally done. So I fixed up the colliders, like I said before, shadow management. When you go past a certain point, for optimization, there's a collider. Where's your collider here? Just like I've had before in the prototype. Get this on. Yeah, here we go. So when the large collider goes past the door, the shadows for the previous room will turn off and vice versa, just for optimization. Got that working again. So basically kind of doing the things I've done for the prototype level and then employing it in the actual first level, going over it and seeing and optimizing the prototype work to be more of a production quality code base and classes. One of the strange issues I found, I saved my character prefab, and I noticed that there's something wrong when I saved the prefab, but like making a copy of my character, this is not a big issue, but basically what was happening, I now in my character model, I have these in order to do certain things, I use the mesh baker to actually do a combined skinned mesh. And while that works and that's great and it optimizes and it allows for certain things that I needed to do, what happened is mesh baker, I've had this issue before where some of these things, they will create a temporary mesh in memory. And just like what was it? Working with Pro Builder, if you create a box, it has a mesh in the scene, but it doesn't actually save the mesh until you say like asset or game object, what was it, or tools, Pro Builder, actions, strip Pro Builder scripts in a section. That Pro Builder, it turns a Pro Builder object into an actual regular object, and it'll go ahead and save the mesh as an asset, and that allows you to save it as because if you saved a Pro Builder object as a prefab and you imported it into another scene or imported to try to make a copy, it won't be able to import the mesh because the mesh Prober creates is a temporary mesh. So there's probably a way when you're in the texture baker, there's probably a way, like some configuration when you check a box and it'll save that actual mesh, not as a temporary mesh, but as a an asset, so you can actually save that and make a proper prefab at it without a missing mesh. But instead of figuring that out, I just kind of wrote a quick script with AI's help to kind of take, take this mesh, the temporary mesh, um, make a copy of the instance and save it as an asset, and then another something else and you save it at a certain path, and then you can load that, use it in your prefab, save that, and then the actual prefab copy will work properly. So just another thing had to figure out, get that done. So on Thursday, I ended the day by actually, following the initial design here. First starting room, then the hallway. Kind of using this as a blueprint to kind of follow as closely as possible, and mostly to scale. So each one of these little squares is related to like one of these little squares, right? That's kind of the scale. And for the actual rooms, I went with a for the prototype, I went with actual just planes with no actual. They had width and height, but no depth. And this time I went with a more of a. So I have a kind of a blueprint system where I was working with 0.5 grid, but I went down to 0.25, and that's really the base for movement, and also the very minimum for the actual any sort of there'll be none less than this as far as the actual foundational structure. So this I found I'm actually liking this a lot better than using planes for a couple of reasons. It's not 100% precise, but and then the end of the day, it doesn't have to be. That's kind of what I'm figuring out here. It's like, you could have this really clean modular system, but that's really not really necessary. It's kind of like oh, everything is perfect, and it's really not about the system. Like, a lot of these things are imperfect. They line up, on the rotation pretty well, but if you look closely, there's imperfections, but you cannot tell at a distance. And that's one of the nice things about top down. Like, I'll show you what I mean. I can actually cheat on a couple things. So the overall look in the room, I want like a high quality, high poly, good looking kind of deal, right? And to the naked eye, that's what it appears to be for the most part, right? Well, I don't have assets for everything, but what I can do, I can make clever use of some of the assets I have. If you take a close look, see, at this distance and top down, you're not going to be able to really tell. Like, one of the things is this this chair here. Since it's in the dark, you can't really tell that this is a low poly asset that I use for my other pack, but it allows me to kind of use a variety of different assets to where you can't really tell. Like, if you can tell if you're actually get really close, but you're not going to be able to tell at this distance the quality of the asset, especially if it's in the dark. So let's just turn on the main light. See how this looks? There's no, if you're really close to it, you say, oh yeah, that's not, that's a low poly, and the texture doesn't look right. There's no details. And the same thing, like, I had these people in the pods, right? And if you get close, it's like, oh, it's so blocky and it's a low. Like, I would not use this if you could see it clearly. But at a distance, you can't tell the difference at all. You can just see a vague shape, and that's kind of the thing I'm discovering. Like objects of focus, like the main character, high poly. Like if you're seeing it, but what I can do, instead of being limited to a smaller set of high poly assets, I can use my low poly assets for other scenarios. This is say things that you can't really see the details clearly of, like this little bottle on the desk, you know, if you get really close, this is a low poly asset. So you can sort of substitute in these, especially for like 80% prototype, you can kind of use these in production to kind of add more variety to your props. So you're not just stuck with, you know, the limited set of high poly or meshes that you have, right? This has a couple uses. You can cut down, you can fill your scene with meshes, but in certain ways you can cut down the overall mesh count, or the vertices count, and still have geometry, even though. And this also allows you to, if I had like a big room where areas like that are off in the distance that I couldn't really get to, I could actually use a low poly asset for like a level of detail, and that would work just fine. It's efficient, and at a distance you can't really tell too much of the difference. And it works pretty well for things like let me show you here. Over one of the things I'll be using, if I go down here to the camera, yeah, here it is. I found this one. Oh wow, look at that. I didn't notice that. It actually unloaded the scene properly at I'll have to, that's very interesting. The actual prototype mechanics is actually unloading the room like it should. I didn't notice that in my testing, but that's how it should work. But anyways, back to the point here. This camera, it doesn't have a nice, you know, detailed texture, but at a distance, you know, on the wall, there's actually enough high poly where it looks pretty good. I could use this as an actual production camera for like a security camera. So I'm finding things, and I'm going through my assets, and I'm kind of going through the demos and kind of saying, oh, I could use this, like I can, you know, do this. And it's a really creative flow process, just kind of randomly throwing paint at the wall, what works, what doesn't, trying new things out. You know, and really discovering and being creative, you know, with the level design. And everything might not work, and it might take additional passes to kind of polish things up. But in general, I follow this pattern. So this is the third room I'm working on. After I got the hallway done, and just adding little things like for the hallway, little touches that occur to me, like, oh, what if I put a window here, and what if I put a little extra floor behind it, and you know, so it kind of gives that 3D look, that transparency, that there's something beyond the wall, like another room maybe, and you can see light bleed through it. But really, what's fun is you go around the wall and it's just like, it's just a floor, and then I added another one of these things, and then a desk. So it kind of feels like there's something in there, but there's really just, you know, that's a trick a lot of these level design things do, because, you know, with the fixed camera angle up here, you're never gonna know that there's nothing behind there, but it gives the illusion there's an actual room behind there as you go through, right? It adds depth and character. So that was Thursday, and then on Friday, so I got the dim lights feature. So, and then I was working on Friday. I got the hallway done, and I moved on to the actual. So just getting started, 1 week's worth of work, I was actually able to get to this point, but you can see that there is a lot more going on here, and that's just one level. And there's a lot more. So I think with all this, it'll definitely give some good content, but you have to build the thing. You have to, yeah, here's floor 2, and just on it goes. So you have to start building the thing, even if it's, not great, even if it's not perfect, even if it's, but as you're building, you'll iron out these things, and you'll rework things, you'll rework your design, but you have to get it down in some sense to a certain quality in Unity in order to keep moving forward, keep making progress on the project, and not just sit here and ruminate and have writer's block. Um, this exercise in itself will give you, and it is doing that. It's giving me ideas. Like one of the examples is for this new room. My initial thought was that from the scale, it's like you come in through this door, you're hiding behind a thing, and then there's 2 guards talking over here. Well, from the scale, it's too big for that. Like it's too much space for over here 2 guards talking. There's all this other extra empty space around. Like I could actually do something. Maybe instead the guards are talking over here, and they go through a door over here instead of up here, and then I have to make it past here and then circle around and weave around and dodge a couple more guards and go through this door to continue, blah blah blah. So a lot of things like that when you're actually running around in here, and yeah, so that's kind of the process, and it's been a whole lot of fun, and there's been a bunch of people that's actually looking at it right now, and they're like, "Oh," and I'm starting to get excited because it's starting to actually look like a real game, especially these first couple sections here where it's not just a prototype level, but an actual, looks pretty darn good. And so it's kind of moving out of the prototype stage until actual production, and that kind of inspires me to keep working on this. Um, so one of the things, so I'm just putting paint on the canvas, and good or bad, I think it's turned out pretty good, but it's just gonna need a lot more work. But um, it seems a lot more manageable and doable not to have to focus on supporting VR right now. That was just a bridge too far, I think, because there's a lot of other requirements in VR you have to think about when you're designing your levels. You know, Eventually I have to target the larger market, and if it, and then eventually, support VR headset as an afterthought, right? I have to leave that door open, but I can't support VR first, and expect to have a successful selling game. So, just kind of putting that to the side and working on a 2D concept game for the time being, like I think that's the right way to go. Um, so, and then, yeah, I discussed pretty much all the rest of it, and it's going along pretty well. And I look forward to continuing working on these levels because the whole time I've done before is really like the actual is the functionality of the character and the and the game systems and basic enemy AI, but actual production levels is a big piece of the game. You can't have a game without levels. So this is not just the prototype level, but the actual concept of the level coming to life, and that's fun. So a new skill, but one that, just like every other skill, has to be developed, and we'll see how it goes in the coming weeks. So that's about it for this time, and we will talk to you later.